You probably think you would recognize a manipulator. You have read the articles. You know the red flags. You consider yourself too intelligent, too aware, too experienced to fall for psychological games. That is exactly what every cult member believed before they joined. That is exactly what every victim of narcissistic abuse believed before they fell in love. Here is a fact that should disturb you. Researchers have found that cult recruits are, on average, better educated than the general population. The members of NXIVM included Hollywood actresses, physicians, and the heir to a billion-dollar liquor fortune. The followers of Jim Jones included nurses, teachers, and social workers who genuinely wanted to change the world. Intelligence does not protect you. Education does not protect you. Awareness does not protect you. Because the technique I'm about to show you does not target your intellect. It targets your neurobiology. It hijacks the same brain circuits that make gambling addictive. And once you understand how it works, you will recognize it everywhere, in relationships, in organizations, in movements you may already be part of. The technique has a clinical name. It is called intermittent reinforcement, and it is the single most powerful manipulation method that both narcissists and cults use to capture minds. Welcome to the cult mind, where psychology, power, and persuasion collide, and nobody is as immune as they think. In 1956, a psychologist named B.F. Skinner discovered something that would eventually explain everything from slot machine addiction to why abuse victims cannot leave their partners. He found that unpredictable rewards create far stronger behavioral responses than consistent ones. Picture a laboratory pigeon pecking a lever. If that pigeon receives food every single time it pecks, it will eventually stop pecking when the food stops coming. The reward becomes expected, predictable, boring. But if that pigeon receives food randomly, sometimes after one peck, sometimes after 50, sometimes not at all, it will continue pecking obsessively, sometimes indefinitely, sometimes until it collapses from exhaustion. This is why gambling is addictive while collecting a paycheck is not. The paycheck is guaranteed. The slot machine is not. And that uncertainty, that randomness, creates a neurological loop that the brain cannot resist. Now here is where it gets disturbing. This exact same mechanism operates in abusive relationships and cultic organizations. The love bombing phase, when a narcissist or a cult showers you with attention and validation and apparent deep understanding, establishes your dopamine baseline. You feel seen. You feel special. You feel like you have finally found where you belong. Then comes the devaluation, the criticism, the withdrawal, the cold silence. Your brain, now calibrated to expect reward, experiences this as genuine crisis. Cortisol floods your system. You feel withdrawal symptoms identical to what a drug addict feels when the supply cuts off. And then, intermittently, unpredictably, the warmth returns. Not consistently, not reliably, just often enough to keep you hoping. Just randomly enough to make each return feel like euphoria. This is not a metaphor. Researchers at the University of British Columbia studied 75 women who had left abusive relationships and found that relationship variables, total abuse combined with intermittency, combined with power differentials, accounted for 55% of variance in how attached victims remained to their abusers. Even more striking, 6 months after leaving, attachment to the abuser had decreased by only 27%. The technique creates literal addiction. Biological anthropologist Helen Fisher confirmed this in 2016. Adversity-ridden relationships do not weaken attachment. They amplify it. Because uncertain rewards trigger greater dopamine release than guaranteed ones. And here is where the pattern reveals itself. Psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton spent years studying Chinese thought reform programs in the 1950s. In 1961, he published a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, which identified 8 criteria that define psychological manipulation. Every single one of these criteria appears in both cult indoctrination and narcissistic abuse. The first criterion is milieu control, the manipulation of environment and information. In cults, this looks like physical isolation and communication monitoring. Members are moved to compounds. Outside contact is restricted. Information is filtered through the group. In a narcissistic relationship, it looks different but works identically. Your partner isolates you from friends and family, monitors your phone, questions where you have been, creates dependency by becoming your only source of information about reality itself. The second criterion is mystical manipulation. Experiences are orchestrated to appear spontaneous while demonstrating the leader's special authority. Cult leaders claim divine guidance. They arrange apparent miracles. They seem to know things they should not know. Narcissistic abusers do the same thing. They position themselves as uniquely able to understand you. They create an us versus them narrative against the outside world. They convince you that only they truly see who you are. The third criterion is the demand for purity. Impossible standards are imposed that generate perpetual shame. Cult members can never be ideologically pure enough. They constantly fail to meet expectations. They internalize the belief that they are fundamentally flawed. In narcissistic relationships, you can never please your partner sufficiently. No matter what you do, it is wrong. You internalize blame for falling short. You believe that if you just tried harder, things would be different. The fourth criterion Lifton identified is sacred science. The leader's doctrine becomes unquestionable truth. In cults, the leader's word is absolute. Questioning is forbidden. Doubt is reframed as personal weakness or spiritual failure. In narcissistic relationships, this manifests as gaslighting. The abuser's version of reality becomes the only acceptable reality. Your perceptions are systematically invalidated. Eventually, you stop trusting your own mind. And here's where it gets personal. These are not rare phenomena that happen to other people. Stephen Hassan, one of the world's leading cult recovery specialists, developed something called the BITE model. It stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. This model was designed to identify cult dynamics, but therapists have discovered something troubling. The BITE model applies with disturbing precision to narcissistic family systems and romantic relationships. Behavior control in cults regulates where members live, what they wear, what they eat. It requires permission for major decisions. Narcissistic partners impose identical micromanagement. They control daily activities, monitor movements, create financial dependency. Information control in cults involves deception, propaganda, and minimizing access to outside perspectives. Narcissistic abusers accomplish the same through lies, gaslighting, and systematic isolation from anyone who might provide a reality check. Thought control uses loaded language and rejection of critical thinking to make members adopt the group's map of reality. In narcissistic relationships, confusion tactics and persistent reality distortion cause victims to adopt the abuser's worldview as their own. Emotional control instills irrational fears about leaving while using guilt and shame as primary control mechanisms. Therapists have a term for this. They call it FOG, fear, obligation, and guilt. It is the identical emotional climate created by both cult environments and narcissistic partners. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist who has spent her career studying narcissistic abuse, puts it bluntly. Every narcissistic relationship is a cult, she says. The cult of two. This is not an exaggeration. It is a clinical observation based on structural analysis. The dynamics are identical, only the scale is different. Now look at the leaders themselves. Jim Jones founded People's Temple in the 1950s. By 1978, he had led over 900 people to their deaths in Jonestown, Guyana. A comprehensive 4-part scholarly analysis published through San Diego State University systematically evaluated Jones against diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. The researcher found strong evidence of a very severe form of NPD with elements of megalomania, power madness, and paranoia. Jones displayed at least 8 of the 9 diagnostic characteristics, possibly all 9. Jones told his followers, "If you see me as your savior, I will be your savior. If you see me as your God, then I will be your God." He played recordings of his own voice through loudspeakers 24 hours a day throughout the compound. Members surrendered their life savings and homes. Jones violated every moral principle he claimed to represent, all while using situational ethics to rationalize his behavior. Keith Raniere founded NXIVM in the late 1990s. In 2019, he was convicted in federal court on charges including racketeering, sex trafficking, and forced labor. He received a 120-year sentence. Over 100 victim impact statements were submitted to the court. The documented evidence reveals identical patterns to Jones. Love bombing that left actress Allison Mack in tears after her first meeting. A collateral system requiring sexually explicit photographs that could be released if members left. Gaslighting that, according to the prosecutor, destroyed his victim's sense of self and ability to trust. Sleep deprivation through 17-hour workdays. The confinement of a young woman named Daniela to a room for nearly 2 years. A peer-reviewed article in the International Journal of Cultic Studies analyzed Raniere using established frameworks for adult grooming and psychosexual exploitation. The pattern was textbook narcissistic predation scaled up to organizational level. But here is what most people miss. Neither Jones nor Raniere recruited vulnerable or unintelligent people. They recruited doctors, lawyers, executives, activists, people who wanted to make a difference in the world. Hassan, the cult recovery specialist, explains why intelligence fails to protect victims. Intelligent people often fall harder, he observes, because their cognitive energy is used to justify, rationalize, and defend the group long after red flags appear. This is the trap of cognitive dissonance. Admitting the truth would require acknowledging that the person you love is deliberately deceiving you, that your entire relationship narrative is fabricated, that you made catastrophic misjudgments. As one clinical analysis puts it, it is psychologically less threatening to think I made a mistake than to think my entire life is a lie. And the more sacrifices you have made, the harder it becomes to leave. leaving money to the organization, cutting off family members, tolerating abuse. Each sacrifice makes departure more difficult because leaving would invalidate every previous sacrifice. Now here's the part nobody wants to talk about. This is not just psychology, it is neurobiology, and the damage is measurable. Research from the National Institutes of Health and multiple neuroimaging studies documents actual brain changes from chronic abuse. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. Studies show robust positive correlation between heightened amygdala activity and chronic abuse. This creates perpetual hypervigilance. Minor triggers produce overwhelming fear responses. You jump at shadows. You cannot relax. Your body stays in survival mode even when the danger has passed. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and rational thought, becomes underactivated during chronic trauma. A 2023 study found that gaslighting specifically impairs prefrontal cortex function. This is why victims describe brain fog, why they cannot think clearly, why decisions feel impossible. The hippocampus, which processes memory, literally shrinks in response to prolonged cortisol exposure. This creates the foggy memory victims commonly describe. They cannot remember what was said, cannot recall the sequence of events, cannot trust their own recollections. Most critically, the neurochemical cocktail created by abuse cycles mirrors substance addiction. Dopamine creates reward circuits linking the abuser with pleasure and survival. Oxytocin and vasopressin, the bonding hormones, become dysregulated, creating chemical attachment that resists logical decision-making. When victims describe feeling addicted to their abusers, they are not speaking metaphorically. Neurologically, they are addicted. Brain imaging shows identical activation patterns to cocaine. This is why telling someone to just leave misses the point entirely. You would not tell a heroin addict to just stop. You would not tell someone with a brain tumor to just think differently. Trauma bonding is a neurological condition created by precisely engineered psychological manipulation. Now look at your own life. Have you ever felt like you could not question something without being attacked? Have you ever been told that outsiders just do not understand? Have you ever felt like, hey, if you just tried harder, things would finally be good? These are not hypothetical questions. These dynamics exist in relationships, obviously, but they also exist in workplaces with toxic leadership, in political movements that demand loyalty over principle, in online communities that police thought, in families that have always been this way. The techniques are not confined to obvious cults or clinical narcissists. They exist on a spectrum, and the more normalized they become, the harder they are to recognize. Consider the modern workplace that demands total commitment, the multi-level marketing company that isolates you from skeptical friends, the online community where questioning the consensus gets you mobbed, the political movement that frames disagreement as moral failure, the family system where one person's reality is the only acceptable reality. The patterns are everywhere. Once you see them, you cannot unsee them. Dr. Judith Herman, whose 1992 book Trauma and Recovery transformed the field, established that trauma is trauma. Whether it comes from combat, political captivity, or domestic violence, the psychological impact of subordination to coercive control has common features. Her key insight was this: prolonged repeated trauma can occur only where the victim is in a state of captivity under the control of the perpetrator. This applies equally to the private sphere of domestic relations and the public sphere of political and religious organizations. This is why recovery from narcissistic abuse and cult indoctrination requires nearly identical approaches: trauma-informed therapy, psychoeducation about manipulation tactics, identity reconstruction, boundary setting, group therapy with other survivors, and often complete no-contact protocols. The International Cultic Studies Association and narcissistic abuse treatment specialists now explicitly fuse their approaches because they are treating the same relational trauma system at different scales. The technique at the center of all of it is intermittent reinforcement. It has the strongest academic foundation, dating back to Skinner's original 1956 research, replicated thousands of times since. It explains the neurological addiction victims experience. It creates the multiple secondary effects: trauma bonding, cognitive dissonance, identity erosion, learned helplessness. And it operates identically whether the context is a romantic relationship or a religious organization. The cycle is predictable. Love bombing creates dopamine and oxytocin surges. Devaluation creates cortisol and adrenaline spikes. Intermittent affection becomes extraordinarily powerful because relief feels euphoric by comparison. The brain adapts, creating tolerance that requires increasing intensity for the same neurochemical effect. The result is dependency. The brain literally rewires to depend on this cycle for neurochemical regulation. 2025 research from McGill University states it plainly. In our model, there is not necessarily anything specific about the target of gaslighting that makes them particularly vulnerable to it. In essence, it could happen to anyone, so long as they are trusting the wrong person. There is nothing special about cult victims or abuse victims that made them vulnerable. These techniques work on everyone, They worked on intelligent, educated members of NXIVM. They worked on social activists who joined People's Temple, hoping to build a better world. They work on people in romantic relationships who simply wanted to be loved. The sophistication lies not in the technique's complexity, but in their precision targeting of universal human needs: the need for connection, the need for meaning, the need for belonging, the need for love. Recognition is the first step toward both prevention and recovery. The technique is invisible until you know to look for it. Once you see the pattern, you see it everywhere. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. That is not a threat. It is a vaccination. The cult does not announce itself. It just makes you feel like you belong. If this changed how you see the world, subscribe. Every week, we expose another mechanism hiding in plain sight.